And right now we treat our environment as if it's like, I don't know, it's like a patient in the intensive care unit who should be, stable, but actually is not getting better.
Welcome to the Sustainable Hospitality Podcast, where we interview industry leaders in all areas of sustainable hospitality and tourism. I am your host, Kathy Sue McGuire, President and CEO of Sustainable Hospitality Solutions. We specialize in gaining internationally recognized ECO certifications for hotels, venues, events, and destinations. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Sustainable Hospitality Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Sue McGuire, and I'm delighted to have with us today Professor Dr. Willy Legrand. He's a professor at International University of Applied Sciences in Germany with a specialization in sustainable management. Over the past 2 decades, he has established over 24 undergraduate and graduate courses on sustainable development in business, tourism, and hospitality management in Europe, South and North America, the Middle East, and Asia. He's the lead author of Sustainability in the Hospitality Industry, Principles of Sustainable Operations, and Critical Questions in Sustainability in Hospitality. Professor Legrand chairs the Hospitality Net World Panel on Sustainability in Hospitality, where over 100 industry experts regularly interact with the aim to get sustainability anchored more than ever into the business conversation and decision-making. He also sits on multiple journal and professional boards and is the co-editor of the Journal of Global Responsibility. He is currently working on 2 new edited handbooks, ESG in Hospitality and Tourism, and on regenerative tourism and hospitality. We're really glad you're here, Willy. I want to start off with it. Summer is unofficially over. What have you been doing lately?
Yeah, you can tell. So first of all, thanks very much for this introduction. You can tell I'm dressed still very casual. I've just gotten back from cycling, from a cycling journey. I've cycled with my brother and my son. We've done that actually many times. We cycled Europe a few years ago, over 3,000 kilometers, 7 countries. But this summer, we actually cycled across British Columbia in Canada. My family lives on Vancouver Island. So we cycled from Vancouver to Prince Rupert. For those of you who know, that's about 1,500 kilometers, plenty of uphill. And then we cycled all the way to the islands of Haida Gwaii. This is where my sister-in-law comes from. And we cycled the islands and we spent some time talking to the First Nation people there and visiting and learning about this history. So it's been quite nice. I'm just getting back into the work mode now.
Yes, I understand that. That's why we appreciate you taking the time because I know how busy you are. You're at conferences all over the world all the time as being on a panel. So you're the best person to talk about regenerative hospitality today. I happened to see your TED talk, your TEDx talk that you did on video because we weren't meeting then because it was COVID. And I just loved everything you were saying. And so that's why I wanted to have you on so that everybody could get an idea of the differences between sustainability and hospitality. And in my mind, I think, well, sustainability is do no harm, regenerative is do more good. So the first question I want to ask you is in your industry discussion, sustainability has become a familiar concept, but regenerative hospitality adds new depth. How would you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have colleagues doing amazing research on sustainable hospitality, regenerative hospitality as well. So I just want to do a shout out, perhaps, because I know of a couple of books that are coming out on the topic. So it's a very hot topic. When people hear sustainable, they often think that we've solved the problem if we just maintain the status quo. So, use less water, recycle more, maybe, I don't know, install solar panels, etc. But the thing is, maintaining the status quo isn't enough anymore, particularly when we consider the growth in our sector, the amount of real estate growth, the amount of travel being done, and also when we consider that we have like this continuous downwards shifting baseline. That what I mean by this that, an increasingly degraded environment which at this point doesn't require sustainability anymore. You don't want to sustain a degraded environment. We need to restore, we need to actively conserve, we need to regenerate, etc. But so that's where maybe that comes in a little bit, and it's not only about environment, but it's really society at large, like communities and individuals. We need to, I would argue, we need to move our baseline upwards, because otherwise, as I said, we have growing population, growing affluence. If we move simply forward with that extractive model, where sustainability really that needs to translate in not keeping that status quo, but actively improving the situation. And maybe this is why we're having sort of discussions around this. And right now we treat our environment as if it's like, I don't know, it's like a patient in the intensive care unit who should be, stable, but actually is not getting better. And this is a little bit what we're trying to do. We're trying to put our environment on the ICU, and it's just being stable. It's not getting better. So, you could argue that regenerative hospitality flips that entirely. How can our hotels or resorts or restaurants, lodges actually heal the place and the communities we touch? So ultimately, you have to remember that originally sustainability was never set as doing less harm system. I mean, this is the way that society and our industry has activated sustainability. This is the way we've implemented sustainability. So if we see a hotel that uses 20% less energy than the neighboring hotel, then we say, oh well, that's a sustainable hotel. Yeah, but it really doesn't make sense. But this is the way this is the problem we were having. We've activated this idea that if we're doing a little bit better than the others, but if we're still using energy from coal-fired power plants, we're still not sustainable. We use less than the neighbors, but we're still not sustainable. But in the context of sustainability, this is the way that's been branded, this is the way it's been marketed. And now we're stuck with this, right? We're stuck with this, and we're stuck with plenty of greenwashing because of that. So I would argue that in fact we got it wrong from the very start.
Yes.
We've made it, we've got it wrong, and we've continued to make it wrong. Regeneration would ask then, how can we create more energy than we consume in this case and share it with our community? So the premise is much better, because the premise is about abundance. It's not about scarcity. And so you could argue, well, it's about leaving every guest, every employee, every neighbor better than before we met them, really. And so
Yeah.
this is why I'm making a long story here, but this is why I love
Hmm.
looking at nature for better models. Yeah, I was just at a conference not too long ago, and I can share that really quickly. That illustrates a little
Hmm.
bit why what regeneration looks like. And it's a lesson for nature that I presented to understand regeneration. So my example was to think about photosynthesis, right? We focus often when we think about photosynthesis, if you remember from high school, we focus on oxygen release as the main feature of interest, because it's crucial to the survival of the entire ecosystem, including us. But when
Hmm.
you actually look at photosynthesis, oxygen release is in fact a byproduct. Because you remember, and you remember maybe that from class, sorry to be so technical, but if you remember from
Hmm.
class, chlorophyll absorbs sunlight, which provides energy needed for the process. Light's
Hmm.
energy split water molecules into oxygen, proton, electrons, etc. Oxygen is released in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is converted in glucose into biomass. So this is an interesting lesson actually, because photosynthesis is the ultimate regenerative process. And the reason I say this is because that photosynthesis not only supports the plant themselves, but also indirectly supports all other life forms, including us
Hmm.
humans, providing us with oxygen, being the base for most of our food chain. So you see what I mean? Like, that ultimate regenerative process is not only about you, it's about everybody else around you. So, what if we could actually learn from nature and put it in practice for us, for our human processes, that you don't do things only for that better you, but through your business, through your hospitality business, actually everyone else benefits. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. You could even deep a little bit more onto nature, because if you look at photosynthesis, just to finish on this, that's the example I had given. Photosynthesis converts only about 1% of all the solar energy received. So if you talk to energy efficiency or any efficiency experts, right, they would tell you that a 1% conversion rate, they would call this a terrible performance.
Yeah.
But here's what they're missing, and this is also a lesson, I think, for all of us. This low performance has enabled the vegetable or vegetal world to spread and adapt to almost all climate zones, all types of light intensity on the planet, from the north to the south to
Mhm.
the equator. And in this context, this is where there's a lot of learning for us, right? In the context of sustainability or regeneration, we may be more interested in mimicking almost the natural efficiencies rather than man-made KPIs, at the expense of the boundaries. So imagine, right, for a minute, if tourism, hospitality could do the same, like you transform the resources into well-being for the people, the planet, you mimic natural efficiencies. I mean, the world could be our oyster, and we could be actually living as living system. And that sets the base a little bit for this regenerative thinking. And it's not something that's way out there. I mean, this is something that's being discussed seriously across the board and not only in hospitality.
That's the best explanation of regeneration I've ever heard. And now I'm thinking I need to change the name of my business from sustainable hospitality to regenerative. I know there's more that I could learn on that subject. And so you brought up, nature and the guest experience. So let's see how we can put this into practice at hotels. Um, you do emphasize, and I've read that you say regenerative hospitality means putting nature at the heart of the guest experience. What does that look like in practice for a hotel or resort beyond just having green space or an eco design feature?
Right. So, I mean, I've said that in the past. So, regenerative hospitality and nature is very important, but it's not only about putting nature at the heart of guest experience. That's
Yeah.
part of it. Anyone can plant some trees and call it green hospitality, but putting nature at the heart means something far more profound. It means recognizing that humans are nature. Do you know what I mean? We're
Mm-hmm.
not separate from it. We're part of this incredible web of life. And we often feel completely, right, completely separated from our environment. I mean, the fact that we're urban probably has triggered that even more, that we're separated from, but we're not. We have organs that do exactly the same as other, right? So we're not separate from, because the regeneration thinking comes from a living system worldview. And in that system, that worldview, that's living system worldview, you have sort of outer dimensions. You're looking at the natural ecosystem, you're looking at a social ecosystem, but there's also inward dimension in hospitality, because you're looking at the relationship that's being created between the guests and the hosts. So it's a little bit more complicated. So in practice, this means your hotel, is deeply rooted in your community you're based in. You're celebrating the history of culture and the natural environment your place has to offer. I don't know, your guests don't wake up to an alarm clock, but they wake up to the natural light rhythm.
Yes.
They're eating tomatoes that grew in a soil enriched by yesterday's kitchen scrap, and guests can actually see this cycle in action, maybe even participate in those processes. But then you look beyond your four walls as well, and you'd collaborate, engage with your local communities and NGOs for a long-term project that matters to them. You brief your guests on the cultural etiquette, on the ethical issues. You hire local talents at all levels. So these are
Mm,
things actually we discuss in sustainability as well. Again, this is nothing new, and I don't think in that respect it's just the way we've implemented sustainability that has gone wrong. We've made it in a way that is a light sustainability. It wasn't meant to be this way. So now, we're talking about regeneration. But when you hear me talking, what I'm talking about is things that because from sustainability, because you say, oh yeah, but sustainability is not, wasn't there this idea of working with the community? Yes, there was. Wasn't there this idea that you have to train, you have to inform your customers about how to interact with culture? Yes. Would you involve your customers in your activity? Yes. So a lot of this isn't new. I mean, it's not like it's new, but it's just the implementation we failed basically. So just going back to your questions, I am a big fan of nature. I'm a big fan of nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation and adaptation. I mean, we see this, right? The hospitality businesses that have done mangrove restoration and coral reef restoration projects for coastal protection where their hotels are located.
Mm-hmm.
We see increase here in the cities where I live. We see increased use of deciduous trees, so trees with leaves, in the cities that provide that natural shade for and freshness for the city, for the outside, but also for the buildings. If you have low
Mm-hmm.
buildings and so on, so in the summer you have full of leaves and it provides the shade and the humidity that you need for the freshness. In the fall, the leaves fall. In the winter, when it's cool here, you still get the sun coming through. I mean, these are things that
It's
we
perfect.
knew, right? We knew all of this. We've lost touch with nature because we have energy to do the cooling, heating, etc. But we're coming back to this. We see green roof, we see building integrated agriculture, we see soft mobility. If you go outside your building, we see soft mobility movements in the cities. So something else than just the cars. And all this contributes, I think, to this needed transformation.
Um, I'm thinking about whole systems thinking. That's kind of a phrase that I've heard, thinking about, the entire ecosystem, including us, is like whole systems thinking. Don't silo what you're doing. It's like that's what I see in hospitality a lot here in the US is siloed thinking was like, oh, we're recycling. Well, that doesn't mean you're green. Well, we donate to the local, nonprofit that takes care of sea turtles. But those are all siloed. It needs to be like they run their business. They don't just look at revenue. They're looking at costs and they're looking at labor and all of those things. So it seems to me like it's like putting all of those things that you do for your business, but thinking about it in a regenerative way, nature and those sorts of things, because the well-being that nature provides, and when you're taking care of the ecosystem, that makes people feel good, physically and mentally, right?
Yeah, I mean you've got it right. And I mean this idea of thinking in silo is embedded already from a young age. I mean, this is the way we do education. We treat problems as individual problems,
Mhm.
not connected to others. We do this at university as well with our education system in business, something I've been critiqued. I've offered a critique, and I'm not the only one for many years now in the way that we
Yeah,
do things. I think
yeah.
we're seeing a evolution, not quite revolution in education system about breaking those silos and understanding the systems approach much better now, but it's a long process, honestly. And so that translates into business practices as well, into our thinking. And we've all become a little bit sort of, there's an expression in German, it's called Fachidiot, so it's an idiot of your fields, basically. We've all become extremely specialized. It sounds a bit derogatory, but it isn't really. It's
Yeah.
it's about the fact that we've all become extremely specialized in what we do. So we become really, really good in one minute aspect that we tend to forget the connection between all the rest. And the connection to all the rest is in the challenges that we have in today's world is so important because the solution on one problem can be a problem to something else. You might fix something that has to do with climate, but by doing so, you're creating biodiversity nightmare. So we need to be able to understand the connection. It's the same in a hotel.
Well, that's a perfect example of our healthcare system. Instead of looking at the whole body like Function Health does, doctors are just looking at their one area. I remember going to a doctor and I said, well, could this have something to do, this pain I'm having, have something to do with this? He goes, well, I just deal in rheumatology. It was like he didn't know anything else and he didn't want to explore anything else. So it's kind of the same thing. You're just fixing one little part at a time or addressing one little part at a time. And
Yeah.
it's not really getting to the core or the cause of what the problem is.
This is why
Um,
this is why, I mean, people keep questioning a little bit this idea of having conferences and is it useful or not useful. I mean, I have mixed feelings at times with this, but if a conference
mhm.
offers the possibilities to have a transdisciplinary approach, in other words, there'll be the biologist that's sitting next to the climate scientist, next to the tourism experts. I think this is a good way forward.
Oh, I absolutely do. I truly believe in travel as a, of course, we do need to get away and explore new areas and get to know other cultures and things like that. But these business conferences are so important to get these people in the same room because they're going to think of things maybe they've never thought of before. And maybe they don't have time to read all the journals and the papers and things like that. But when you go to a conference like that, it really sticks, don't you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
But it has to be designed purposely from the start. If you put a bunch
Yes.
of marketing people together with marketing speakers, you'll have the marketing coming out of this. So you need to
Yeah.
have the marketing people alongside other people. You see what I mean? Like it needs to be
Yes.
this multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, how would you address, for example, there are a lot of hotels that aren't doing anything, and comparing them to the hotel across the street, really doesn't get to that regenerative point. But if they're not doing anything, is approaching at as sustainability to get them to at least start measuring their energy and water use and things like that, or should we just flip it and just let's go for regenerative because it will take care of those things so we don't have to do sustainability first and get them doing something right and then coax them into doing more.
Yeah, perhaps,
What do you
yes. I
think?
haven't thought so much about this, but I mean, you're suggesting something which could be quite powerful. I mean, we have to remember that it's almost about understanding hospitality beyond what it is now, which what it is now, it's heavily transactional. I mean, this is what hospitality is. And if you think about traditional hospitality, when you stayed in someone's home, they were unwritten rules. You respected their space, you contributed to conservation, you left things better than you found out, you didn't trash the place. So somewhere along the way, hospitality became purely transactional. But true hospitality has always been about generosity in some ways. I'll come back to flipping the script in a minute, but
Hmm?
we think sometimes about a social contract between the guest and the host. This is a way to behave as a host, but it's also the way to behave as a guest. And when we focus on transaction only, that's taken much away from that unwritten social contract. I mean, guests have expectations that really push beyond planetary boundaries. So what do hoteliers do? They feel the pressure to compete and to answer those requests, to deliver those experience they know aren't sustainable. But they do
Mm-hmm.
it because that's the competitive pressure and it's the transactional aspect. So I like your idea of, flipping the script. That also means a rethinking about hospitality, really. I mean, going back to the source and the philosophy behind hospitality. And so when we say, leaving the place a better place, we mean the place in every sense. I mean, it's the lands, the communities, the economy, and yes, maybe it's also the guest's inner landscape, right? When a guest leaves and feels connected to
Yeah.
its own sense of purpose, perhaps, that's also good. So, the question is, okay, should you hit the hotel straight with a regenerative program? I mean, there are debates out there to say, listen, we need to really be thinking about how to restore because the planet is in a bad shape. So, in that respect, if for you that means I've got a hit on regeneration because restoration is a key component, then be my guest. Maybe it's a little bit of semantics here, but I'm thinking I can hit a hotel talking about sustainability and having the same exact speech. I mean, at this point, do you see what I mean? I
Yes.
am, listen, I'm not hanging up on words. And I know in my community, but also in the practice community, there's a lot of debate about the meaning of regeneration. This is why some books are coming out trying to set the stage for this, because
Good.
there is the danger, of course, of hijacking that term regenerative hospitality or regeneration to again, just like with sustainability, to dilute it somehow and to make it into a new marketing term that sells well. So I'm really quite worried about that.
Yeah.
And so maybe podcasts like this, but also books that are coming out by colleagues are going to help to the stage. But as I said, regeneration or regenerative hospitality isn't a term, it isn't a legal term. It's not like organic, like
Hmm.
there's a
Yes.
clear delimitation of when you can use organic or when you cannot, as a word, but that doesn't exist for sustainability or sustainable hospitality, nor does it exist for regeneration.
Well, I think then we're going to rely on you, Willie, to get that regenerative message out there with that definition so that we can use it like what Brundtland said, defined what sustainability is, like not using more than you need, and to not I'm not quoting it exactly,
Yeah,
but
so sustainable
leaving for
development.
future
That's
generations
right.
type thing,
A development that meets the needs of the present without
present
compromising the
without.
ability of future generation to meet their own needs, which I quite like in
Yes.
many ways, but I quite like it because it's applicable and dependent of your geography and dependent of your class and dependent of your affluence, because but it is also problematic because it's not a guidebook to say, and this is how you do it. Point one, two, three, right?
That's what we need. And are you coming out with a book like that? This is
So,
regenerative,
right.
and it's not
So,
transactional. And
right. So, yes, I do, but I'm not the only one. So I just don't want to make the whole thing my thing. So there's
yes,
a handbook that came out recently from colleagues, by one of the British publisher, a handbook on regenerative tourism. So rather the bigger umbrella approach. There's another book that will come out from a colleague of mine, a prof, in Switzerland, that will be about regenerative hospitality with excellent material in it. I'm just reading it because I'm writing the foreword for that book. And then there's my own edited book. So I'm doing this with two academics from the US, and we're basically having some 60 experts contributing to that book. And that's really also trying to set the boundaries of what is and what isn't. And hopefully that will help.
I'm looking forward to all of those. Let's talk about a luxury amenity that's often overlooked: footwear. Disposable hotel slippers may check a box, but they pose a significant waste problem. Millions end up in landfills every year. Feel Goods Hospitality is changing that. As leaders in sustainable footwear, they've launched an eco-friendly in-room slipper collection, crafted with natural materials and designed for guests to take home and enjoy again and again. Turn a thoughtful amenity like slippers into a lasting memory without the environmental cost. Visit feelgoodshospitality.com to request a sample. Feel Goods Hospitality. Take home a piece of your stay. What I'm thinking is when I talk to hotel management companies and general managers, um, they seem to be focused on just one thing, heads and beds. What would be a good way with them looking at their numbers, their RevPAR, their ADR, all of those things? How could we, because what I've been doing in approaching them to at least become sustainable and looking and putting it all together as a holistic hospitality type of thing system, um, it doesn't go over really well because it's not it for some reason it's not resonating with them. It's like, how do you compare it to their business? Like, this is going to put more heads in beds, um, excuse me, and regenerate what you're doing all the time. So it's great guest experience and things like that. How would you talk to hotel owners and operators about
Okay, so I mean,
doing something?
you're touching a little bit on sort of what are the barriers, but also then what are the motivators and how do we measure the success? I mean, these are two
Hmm.
things that are sort of going with one another. I mean, in a way, I've done work years ago on barriers to sustainability implementation, which will be the similar barriers to regeneration. I suspect it's the same thing. It's a lot of
Yeah.
it, the first barrier was and still is the mindset. So most of the industry is still operating really operating from a scarcity thinking, believing that doing right by the planet means you're going to sacrifice profit and you're going to sacrifice guest experience. This is a bit of a shame, isn't it? Because by
Yes.
providing a very good, wholesome experience to your guest, actually you're benefiting your guests. You're not sacrificing your guests. But anyways,
Oh,
if you provide good and healthy food that's local, you actually are doing something good to your guests. But so it's not easy, and I understand why. I mean, we have to think about the system that we're in without making it a huge macroeconomic things. We have to think that our economy is largely driven by extraction, where ultimately the cost of externalities are not represented in the final pricing
mm,
of goods and
right.
services. So would those costs be included? The sustainable or regenerative options, call it either way, would be the cheapest around, and we would not have this discussion. So a big part of this is the lack of transparency and the lack of proper pricing, which means that the cheap, dirty product, which costs society a lot, but not directly in the pricing of the
Yes.
product, that's a real issue. It's a real problem. Linked to this, I think, in terms of another barrier to action, and then I'll come back to what you were asking about, how do we motivate them perhaps. But so linked to the second barrier is, I would say, is the short term thinking. I
Yes.
mean that sustainability investment, we've talked about this in the past, but it's the same with regenerative stuff. It pays off enormously in the global scales, but the time scales is different. We move away from a quarterly report. We need to have patience. We need to have patient capital in some ways, and we need to have a leadership that think in longer cycle. I know we've talked about this in the past, but I've always said we need a cathedral thinking approach. So a long-term approach when you work on a project where you're not going to see the end of this project in your lifetime, but you're
Yes.
part of it because it's part of a living system. So,
It's like planting the tree whose shade you will never enjoy.
well, exactly,
I
exactly.
can't remember. There's a quote from some philosopher or something, but I can't remember who it
Yeah.
is. But I love that. Yes.
I walked in the neighborhood this summer on Vancouver Island, neighborhood that 20 years ago was absolutely terrible because it was a brand new neighborhood. Unfortunately, they had clear cut the place. There was some beautiful, but they had clear cut. And they
Yeah.
had planted some small trees, of course, and the neighborhood looked terrible. I went back now, it's 25 years later, and of course it's starting to take shape. I mean, they're starting to be natural shade. So yeah, it is. They could have avoided the whole thing had they had better systems approach before. But anyways,
Yes.
it is that.
Exactly.
So we need more of that long-term cathedral thinking approach in a world that's designed to reap the benefits tomorrow. That's the challenge, right? It's hard. It's a hard situation. And this is why I didn't want to go so much into it because it actually calls for a system change. There's another gap I think that works as a barrier. It's the knowledge gap. And most hospitality
Mm,
professionals, let's face it, were not trained into ecological thinking or systems design. This is right. This
right.
is changing rapidly, and I say this because I see what's happening in hospitality education, and I can see that systems design, system thinking is being implemented. I can see there's much more on sustainability, etc. So this is changing, but we have currently decision makers that were not trained this way. They were definitely trained in traditional business school, where again, the same
Yeah.
system was perpetuating the issue. And then perhaps the last one before I move on, but I mean, the regulatory barriers exist as well, right? Sometimes the most regenerative solutions don't fit your existing building codes or they don't fit your zoning laws. So then
Mm,
you need the
right.
policymaker to be on board. They need to understand that these old rules were designed for a world that actually no longer exists. So then you turn
That's
around
right.
and so that sets the stage a little bit for what the barriers. And I think we need to realize, we need to acknowledge that this is the case. So now if you dilute this, you can say, well, I mean, obviously there's training is needed to take place, knowledge sharing needs to take place. This is why I do so much of what I do is about trying to bring this to a wider audience. So, and then you go and you need to have a discussion with your hotels, and you need to be able to discuss things such as measuring impact. And again, this is where it becomes challenging in regenerative because regeneration means different things to different people. and that creates a measurement challenge. And the reason, I mean, I'm saying this because it has it has an impact on how you process regeneration. What I mean by this is, if you think that regeneration is a living systems approach, this is going to be a hard sell for your hoteliers because you're basically taking their world apart, right? If
Yeah.
you say it's a living systems approach, in a living systems approach, there isn't KPIs. What I mean by this is
Yeah.
photosynthesis is not a KPI thing. Do you know what I mean? It's just
You're
happening.
measuring impact. You can't measure impact now. The impact will be seen later, like
Yeah.
the tree in the shade
Yeah.
sometimes. So it's like, why would we want to do that when we don't know if it's what the ROI is?
That's right. So exactly. So the shade of a tree in front of your building is a very good example. I mean, ultimately, you get the scientists that will measure the temperature of your inner walls, outside walls, and you can get the science behind it. But regeneration in this case, and this is the big thing behind this, regeneration in this case is a paradigm shift. I had a talk from Anna Pollock at ITB Berlin this year,
Yes.
which was absolutely amazing because she talked about metamorphosis and she used a caterpillar, right? The caterpillar becoming a butterfly. So that's transformation. But once you become a butterfly, you never go back to being a caterpillar. And
Yeah.
so what she argued is she argued that rigid metrics may hinder that transformative change necessary.
Mm.
You don't if you measure a frog,
Yeah.
you kill the frog. So a living system to measure living system is hard. We're not there yet in hospitality. And yes, we will have to deal with the fact that we are more pragmatic and more realist. We're still within a system that actually needs to have measurable outcomes if we know we're doing something well. So, there's the other part saying, well, if I do restoration work in my surrounding, I need to be able to know, is the soil of better quality? And we can measure this. You see what I mean?
Yes. That's true.
Are the trees growing to the speed they're supposed to go? So we can measure this. So, I don't want to say that we should not measure anything. I'm just saying there is this idea of a living system that we have to understand. I understand the practicality as well of running a business and trying to see, are my effort paying off in whatever I'm doing? And so, yes, I think this idea of having a framework to track progress that would help hoteliers, this is actually being developed, right? It's this idea of what gets measured, gets managed. Okay, so in regeneration thinking, you don't manage, you just live. It's two different
I
things.
love that.
Yeah. So it's not right. It's not really easy. So I'm trying to build the bridge over. It's not easy because this is it's very much a flow right now. So and I'm not sure where I stand myself, but probably I stand in what I would say sort of the strategic corner in some way. Because as I said, we already track soil health improvement. We track biodiversity increases. We track carbon sequestration rate. We track watershed restoration, right? And all of that
Mhm.
plays a role in regeneration. So then you push this a bit further and you say, how do you measure whether a guest leaves feeling more connected to nature? Because
Mhm.
regeneration will be that as well. How, right? So traditional
Mhm.
hospitality will track your room rates, it will track occupancy, but regenerative hospitality cares about transformation. So how do you measure community well-being? How do you measure cultural preservation? We might have to think about new metrics for regenerative improvement, but it's not easy. So I go back
Yeah.
to guest experience. I mean, a lot of the hoteliers are quite interested in that, particularly guest experience, because they know this is what matters. You could go down the path of well-being indicators, so stress reduction, sleep quality, sense of connection, sense of purpose, tracking your guest that leaves your property with new environmental behavior that persist after their stay. So do they start
Yeah.
composting at home because they've seen it at a hotel? Do they choose travel options that are different? Do they support in their private life
Yeah.
local businesses because they've learned this from you? So these
Yeah.
impacts are real, they do matter, but they're hard to track. None of this is easy, none of this is straightforward, and that's where we are right now.
Well, it makes me think about the carrot and the stick. The stick being regulatory compliance, new laws, things like that. And Europe is doing a lot of that, but in the U.S. we don't really have that going. So there's really no stick. So that I can think of, unless you're saying, hey, if you don't do this, you're not going to get those eco-conscious guests. They're not going to come to your hotel. And there's a lot of that talk. I'm guilty of it myself. Don't get left behind. Statistics show that this is what guests want, even if they don't ask you up front for it. It's kind of what they're expecting you to do the right thing, or and this is you're going to earn more revenue because you're going to be able to market to those eco-conscious consumers. So that would be kind of the carrot part. But I haven't found anything that's being said or done that really motivates people outside the old paradigm of thinking heads and beds. Do you have any thoughts on that, carrot and stick?
So I have to tell you, and this is, I'm in some circle, I'm not very popular because I believe that sticks are very important in today's society. The reason I'm saying this is because
Mhm.
our back is against the wall, and I think the policymakers have got an extreme responsibility to act. This is the reason why we have this system of decision making. This is why we vote, and this is why we. So when we are our back is against the wall, the expectation is that they actually act on our behalf. That they're not doing it is a failure of the system. There's no doubt about it.
Mhm.
So I am, it's not, life is not all about sticks. I understand this, but ultimately, and again, this is a realization, you and I, we can be as virtuous as we want, but we live in a world which doesn't support virtue. Do you see what I mean? It's a world which is extractive, it is detrimental. This is our system, this is our economic system. We have to realize the economic system is not a system. It's working extremely well for what it was made to do, which is you take nature, you reap nature to make an economic profit. The forest standing is worth nothing to you. The forest
Mhm.
that's cut into wood that I can use, so you destroy the forest, that's what's worth. So the system is based this way, which means that you can be as virtuous as you want, but and I like to do this. I mean, I grow my own food if I can, and I don't own a car, so I walk and I cycle, I take public transit. You can be as, but we still operate within a world which doesn't necessarily support this, which means we need to have the politics actually really doing the work. We need to have the stick. We need as citizen to put pressure for sure on those big decisions because the needle needs to move. Everybody, you and I and everybody else can have their own little gig going, but the needles need to move by those who are really impacting this planet negatively. It's the big companies, it's the ultra rich, it's right the governments that are not supporting. This is the big levers
Yeah.
that need to be moved. So yes, the stick is important, and I know this is not popular what I'm saying within the business community, but those of them that are ahead of the game do not care but the stick because the stick is always
Yes.
behind best practices anyways. So those that are doing extremely well on any of those topics, whether it's, and if you can take an example, I know building energy efficiency, they don't particularly care about the new law on energy efficiency for building because they're already light years ahead of any of this.
Yes.
But you need to
Yes.
have that because everybody needs to move and we need to move ever faster.
I'm
And
I'm with you 100% on this because it reminds me of I don't know if you've heard of this. Have you heard of the tragedy of the commons?
of course,
Yes. So it's like, you and me and many others want to do the right thing, and we do that because that's part of our values. And we wouldn't have the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act if we didn't make businesses stop polluting with legislation. And so, to rely on companies not to do those things, that they there has to be a stick. I'm with you 100%. So I'm not going to be popular too, but I'm with you. So I was just wondering, what could be our next step in trying to get this message across? Because it's one I care about deeply, and I know that you do. And um, I'm not, and maybe it's me. I'm not having a lot of success trying to convince hotels. And I don't think it's the cost. I don't think it's because they absolutely don't want to do it. I think the bandwidth of staff, it's change. Everybody's like, oh no, we don't have time for change and things like that. In Europe, you're so much farther ahead than we are here. Is it a mindset, a culture that's different? Because in the US, Americans are individuals, don't tell me what to do, kind of culture. Is
Yeah.
it the cultural difference that you're so far ahead?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yes, so far ahead in some topics, but perhaps in others, not at all. I mean, I don't know. I think, I mean, it's just because we think of the regulatory landscape and it is a little bit ahead than other parts of the world. But I mean, I think in terms of practices, I find in terms of the actual practices of businesses, you find best practices across the planet and across countries where the system isn't particularly supportive in any case, but they still do it and they do it well. So that's
Yeah,
kudos, right?
yeah,
To nations that really are struggling themselves and they're not ahead on a sustainable game, but you still have those operators and those investors that do it well. Um, so yeah, maybe it is a little bit mindset. It is maybe the geopolitics of how things are and the different pressure points that we have. I mean, here energy is a big topic, especially in Germany because we don't have an energy independence, and with
right.
the wars that we're having and the pressure on the energy, of course, people become. And you can see that actually the price point matters. I mean, you could see that if you bring the price of energy up, people will do everything they can to save it. So if you put the price of gasoline up, you will see the change in behavior and the change in car size and whatever. So maybe that also there's a bunch of factors. It's hard, and I don't think we should necessarily try to compare countries. I mean, you can compare sort of things such as, well, what is your policy landscape? What do the law looks like? But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of individual component that plays a role. And even within the US, I mean, you take the East Coast, the center, the West Coast,
Yes.
or the
Yes.
North, the South, etc. You
Yeah.
have it's very, very,
Very
very
different.
different.
It
Access
is.
to your access to energy is different. I mean, so it's very
Yeah.
difficult, every context. And this is one thing that matters to regeneration because regeneration is place-based. I mean, this idea of place really matters in
Yeah.
regeneration. We are geography bound. We cannot forget this. We have a global thinking and a global approach, but we are in hospitality bound to a place, bound to the resources that are around you. Do you know what I mean? We're geography.
Mhm.
We're not virtual businesses. People still come physically to our place.
Yeah.
And so we are bound to a supply chain that's there. We're bound to the resources. This is something very important. This is why I don't necessarily compare. When people ask me about best practices, about places where is it very good and who, I mean, you can list places across the planet in all sorts of countries, all sorts of systems, and some of the systems are supportive and some of them are not. Um, but there was in a conference I was attending recently, there was one speaker who made a very good comment. She says there are, I don't think I'm going to get it right here, but she said there are five factors that enables sustainability that you can be sure it's going to work long term. And that also is for regeneration. So it's the institution, civil society, biodiversity, finance, and I'm missing a very important one. I just don't remember. Maybe it's policies. I'm not too sure. So there's this, and
Mhm.
and that basically, if you have that in a country and it works, that is civil society puts pressure, it's active, etc. You have biodiversity that's being protected. You have institutions that you can trust do their work. You have the politics. Anyways, you have all of that. There's a good chance sustainability will be long term and it's going to work. If you're missing parts of it, you will try, there's a chance you fail, there's a chance it works, it doesn't work, it's hard, it's right. So I thought this was very interesting. Actually,
Yeah.
this is that if you're interested in this, there's a YouTube because that was a conference in Costa Rica, and I think the panel is on YouTube as well. So my speaker explains this really well.
Oh, I definitely want to check that out. One of the last things I wanted to ask you about, what about case studies. I mean, sharing those because, Six Senses, One Hotels, and there are others have really embedded uh, sustainability, regeneration into I mean, that's how they started out. This is what we're going to do. And like a client that I had for many years, Soul Community Planet, they started off with wellness in mind, wellness of the planet, wellness of the person, physically and their soul community planet. And so those are great case studies, I think. And I wonder, do we need to talk about them more, or is that shaming? It's like, well, you're not doing what they're doing, so you're no good. I mean, people don't really respond to shame like they would a stick or a carrot. But what do you think?
So yeah, so guilt and shame and things like that are it's not great,
No.
honestly. So those are there's another model by a researcher called Per Espen Stoknes that explains a little bit the psychological barriers we have and why we don't act on climate or environment. So he calls this the 5 Ds, letter D. So denial, dissonance, and one of it is identity. When decisions are being made that you feel you're being put to guilt or you feel like it attacks your lifestyle, you're
Close
going to
down.
push back against.
Yeah.
So any of this doesn't work. So, and if you attack this directly, the people will not support you. They will push against you. And so there are tricks, and he calls this the 5 S's for the letter S's to try to bypass and change people's views on this. And something could be there's social sorry simple actions. There's the 5 S's. So that's quite good. I want to come back
Yeah.
to your question. So shame and guilt that's not going to
Yeah.
work. Um, I want to come back a little bit to the cases you've mentioned. So um, yeah, I mean, let's turn this back a little bit and let's talk about the guest quickly. I mean, guest, should they have to choose between a luxurious experience and meaningful experience? And people want both now. And luxury, I'm not talking about conspicuous luxury. I'm talking about luxury in terms of having access to clean environment and fresh air, and you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's a
Yeah.
so there are lots, I think there's lots of examples. I mean, if for me, what comes to my mind quickly, and it's not individual example, but it's two network. And one of it is called The Long Run, which I think you probably know or have heard of. The network called The Long Run. This is a membership organization for tourism businesses, and nature conservation here plays a central role. And you will find that bridge of luxury and meaning, but again, not conspicuous luxury. We're talking about pristine environment, exquisite nature, access to flora and fauna, etc. And they have lots of cases about how they do this. And if we go down the route of regeneration, I think you could look at a network of regenerative travel, perhaps. They offer exceptional guest experience alongside regenerative value. That comes as a price tag, though. And that's the other question behind that is
Yeah.
then regeneration or sustainability then for the rich on this planet? And that
Yeah.
goes against the basic principle of sustainability, which should be for everybody.
Yeah.
So for me, then that raises one last question is, the secret is understanding what really is luxury in our lives and luxury in hospitality. And when you think about it,
We need to redefine luxury as
yeah,
well, right?
and
Yeah.
exactly. And I would argue that in this day and age, luxury is found in a connection to beauty, in a connection to meaning, in a connection to the others, in a connection to nature. So things that are larger to ourselves. And I think this is where regeneration comes into the game because regeneration delivers this in the deepest level. And that's, you can think, oh, it's a little bit philosophical, but it isn't only. I mean, beauty, meaning, relationship to others, relationship to nature, these have got practical aspects of it as well. And this is where I would get excited about regeneration
Yeah.
moving forward.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I want to be mindful of your time, so I just have one more question for you. Looking ahead, what are you working on? What are you excited about?
So I've got two books that I'm working on. One is this handbook on regenerative hospitality and tourism with O'Shannon Burns from Cornell and Jonathan Day from Purdue. So we're working hard at this right now. We've got lots of chapters to go through. That's going to come out in 2026. I have another handbook that I'm working on. It's called the ESG in Tourism and Hospitality. So slightly more corporate aspect of environmental social governance. So those are two handbooks that are coming out in 2026. I've got my big textbook, which is called Sustainability in Hospitality Industry. The fourth edition has been
I bought
around.
it.
Yeah, so it's 800 pages, but now I'm going to be working with my two co-authors on a fifth edition. There is so much happening. We're going to be working on a fifth edition, so I'm looking forward to including all new case studies and revamping some of the chapters and providing a an update on the policy landscape around the globe and all of that. And of course very practical things as well for the hoteliers, how to calculate XYZ that's linked to sustainability and regeneration in this case.
I don't know how you do it all. It's just amazing. That's why I appreciate you so much taking the time to speak with us today because it's very important, and I want to do everything I can to support you and to further the movement of regeneration. So everyone, please follow Professor Dr. Willy Legrand because you won't be disappointed. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being with us.
My
Take
pleasure,
care.
Katie. Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Hospitality Podcast. If you're ready to take meaningful action and set your property apart as a leader in sustainability, my company, Sustainable Hospitality Solutions, is here to help. Our Achieving Green Keys certification training program provides hotels with a clear step-by-step path to earning this internationally recognized eco certification. Please go to sustainablehospitalitytraining.com. Thank you.